Good morning, everyone. I am Shashank Gupta, Assistant Professor English from Government J. Yoganandam Chhattisgarh College, Raipur. Today we are starting Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. Who was Virginia Woolf? Virginia Stephen was born into a wealthy and well-connected London family. Her father was Sir Leslie Stephen, a renowned critic, and her mother was Julia Stephen, a beautiful woman who often modeled for portraits. Her mother died when Virginia was young, her brother also died tragically, and her father died when she was 22. These events had a huge impact on Virginia's mental health, and she was thereafter often treated for nervous breakdowns. In her youth, she was restricted from the level of education her brother received, but she learned as best she could and was soon surrounded by a group of intellectuals from the Cambridge colleges her brothers attended. With her siblings and friends, Virginia formed the Bloomsbury Group, dedicated to art, literature, politics, and for discussion. Leonard Woolf was one of the group members, and Virginia married him in 1912. The pair shared a long marriage, but the Bloomsbury Group was famously liberal politically and sexually. And Virginia also fell for Vita Sackville West, who inspired the novel Orlando. She published her first novel, The Voyage Out, in 1915 and wrote continuously up to the year of her death, publishing her most famous novels, Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, and Orlando between 1925 and 1928. She also wrote and delivered the lectures that became A Room of One's Own in 1928. Virginia's health continued to plague her through her life, and she eventually committed suicide at the age of 59. Virginia Woolf has been asked to speak about women and fiction to a group of female students from the Cambridge colleges of Newham and Girton. She considers what one means by women and fiction, thinking that the most interesting idea will be to consider all aspects intertwined, including women writers and fiction about women. She soon realizes that she will not be able to offer any truth on the matter. She can only offer her opinion that a woman needs money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. She can show how she came to this opinion, and through this journey her audience may be able to draw their own conclusions. She will use the method of fiction to describe this journey. Okay, since fiction is their subject and has she has invented her setting Oxbridge from two recognizable settings, Oxford and Cambridge. She sits on the river bank thinking without many things. She finds herself walking rapidly over a lawn and is soon apprehended by a guard who tells her that only fellows and scholars of this Oxbridge are allowed on the grass. She was taken aback by this incident, started walking on the gravel, and again lost in her thought process. She reminded of Milton's poetry and uh, a most perfect novel, Esmond. She thinks that she must go to the library where these manuscripts are also kept there. The narrator excitedly imagines finding in these manuscripts some key to the author's intent, but when she arrives at the famous library, she is turned away because she is a woman. She keeps herself away. When she was turned down to enter into the library, she moves on from there. She saw a chapel, but she keeps herself away from the church, thinking perhaps women cannot enter this place also. She goes on thinking about the grand building of Oxbridge. So much donations, so rich scholars, fellow men. Okay, rich men enters to study here and scholars become rich after they graduate from here. She moves a bit ahead for lunch where she sees a cat without tail. She describes food in great detail of the lunch. Scholars and fellows there reciting Tennyson's poetry in humming sound. After lunch, she goes to a fictional women's college, Farnham, where at lunch time she misses the vigor and the level of discussion as it was in Oxbridge. She is compelled to think of the double standard of the contemporary progressive society where women were deprived of things which were easily accessible to men. She comes to the crux of the thought process that still women cannot be a part of legacy or create legacy as men have because she has to deal with household duties, bearing children. Her imaginary character, Mary Saturn's mother, tried to forego family responsibilities, but again, she doesn't have funds to multiply to create such grand buildings and atmosphere for women. Even if she had, society would not have allowed her to come forward to do such things. She comes to a conclusion that she will have to find another compromising. She means here Virginia Woolf. Okay, she don't want to blame anybody, so therefore she comes to a conclusion that she will have to find another compromising conclusion without blaming men or women for her present situation. The narrator is eager to find the truth about why women is facing poverty. To confirm this truth, she needs unbiased books. Leaving behind the Oxbridge, the narrator enters the British Museum and there she finds a library. She was surprised to see the catalogues that all the books are written by men only and there were hardly any book written by women. She found there that all books were written whether by kings, by lords, by scholars, by fellows, and were written extensively on the subject of women. But the catalogue under the letter M, women writers nearly absent. Most of the catalogues were filled with the titles written on all the aspects of women, but none of has written about why women were facing poverty. Some of the writers were of the views that women have no characters, whereas some have characterized women as height of humanity. The narrator has drawn a figure of the professor and angrily stabbing this paper. The narrator knows why she is angry. Okay, the narrator knows why she is angry. She is angry at the title of the professor's book, and the title is The Mental, Moral, and Physical Inferiority of the Female Sex. Most of the book in this library about women is outcome of anger of man. She thinks like this. Most of the books in this library about women is outcome of anger of man. They were all written in the red light of emotion and not the white light of truth. And the narrator considers them useless for her purposes. The narrator moves on from library to a restaurant for lunch. There she reads a newspaper and finds the news which belittles women's respect. And the news in the newspaper was man fulfilling roles in politics, film, society, and sports. Here one can again see the anger of man towards their superiority over women. Even if it happens that woman starts revealing the truth that women are in no way inferior to man, man will find it unfit and degrading for the status of women. Men, degrading for the status of man. Okay. After lunch, when the waiter hands over the bill to the narrator, she finds it an opportunity to explain her financial circumstances. She inherited yearly allowance of 500 pounds from her aunt. Okay, and she leads her life very comfortably with this sum of amount without any male support. The narrator admits that money was the most significant thing which gave her more freedom than anything else. She put forth an argument that 100 years ago painter might have more value than a maid. That is no longer the same case in present time. Okay, right now a painter and a maid can be of same value. Okay, people may not differentiate that painter is more valuable than a maid, or maid is inferior to a painter. If the gendered based occupations have the power to change in value, so does the fiction, isn't it? The narrator comes back home disappointed when she could not find the fact why women are facing poverty than men. She goes through the history of England and finds that history is full of man's action and deeds. Okay. Women are nearly absent in history of England. If we go through Elizabethan period, there were so many great personalities like Shakespeare. But account of women's lives are almost non-existent. A historian claims that women was uh, not uh, like uh, uh, not liking in personality, rather he finds a fascinating inconsistency appears in the female sex. Okay, fascinating inconsistency. When we look at Shakespeare's plays, Cleopatra and Desdemona are full of characters. In imagination, we find women astounding and with more varied shades. But in life and in history, women are treated as property of husband and therefore invisible. Even in the Elizabethan age, it was said that Elizabethan age was golden age for poets, but women poets and their presence were almost non-existent. There is no history about women that will provide women's perspective. Trevelyan, the writer of the history of England, claims that most girls were married by 16. So it was nearly impossible for them to write a single page about themselves or about a girl of her own age. Therefore, the narrators invents a character, Judith Shakespeare, sister of William Shakespeare. When William Shakespeare was attending school, going to theatre, learning acting, working as an actor, Judith has to stay at home, mending clothes and waiting for her dreams to get crushed by marrying in her early age. Forced marriage by parents. The narrator continues for um, by saying that that is Judith, that if Judith had not accepted her fate like this, she would have run away to England to learn acting or work in theatre. There she might be mocked by everyone, got pregnant by the manager, and eventually committed suicide. Okay, just an imagination, isn't it? The narrator argues that there were some women of Shakespeare's stature, but they had to bear responsibility of family, of children, so it becomes almost impossible for them to concentrate to write a play like King Lear. But the narrator does not, but the narrator does admit that women of higher standing have better luck. Men react more favorably to writing countess than a writing working class mother. Countess and ladies had comparatively financial freedom, but they had to face ridicule and risk also. She gives example of uh, Lady Winchilsea, Margaret of Newcastle, Dorothy Osborne, Aphra Behn, Brown sisters, Jane Austen, George Eliot. Okay, most novels, she says, come to grief. But does this have anything to do with the sex of the writer? She thinks that women writers' integrity has been compromised by the authority of man. Male values prevail, so male writers are found reflecting real life in easier way. Women have found it almost impossible to write about filling their pages with anger, defensiveness, or submission. The narrator has tried so far in her essay showing how women have had to manage without a literary history of their own. But now she asserts that the legacy is now starting to exist. Women writers have started writing novels taking into consideration economics and philosophy as well. The narrator creates an imaginary figure with the name Mary Carmichael and starts reading her novel where she finds that her sentences are broken and not like Jane Austen, whose sentences flow like music, isn't it? As she reads, the narrator waits nervously for the important moment that Mary Carmichael must show if she is to prove herself. It is a moment of going deeper into the world of history, of going beyond the shallow surface of appearances. The professor and historians of the male world will be shouting out their advice to her, but she must not be distracted. The narrator concludes, having finished the novel, that considering Mary Carmichael's talents and circumstances, she did well. But in another 100 years, she will write a much better book. Just as women writers through history has unfortunately filled a lot of their fiction with bitterness and anger and biased view, she is of the opinion that the modern man is doing the same. She opines that a writer should leave the I aside while writing fiction. While the women of history feared their inferiority, men in modern times fear the loss of their superiority. Okay, the narrator leaves here, and for Virginia Woolf takes over her fictional character. Her audience must have listened to Mary's journey and must have concluded little bit of truth. She was anticipating two criticisms. Firstly, the audience would have noticed that Virginia gave no evaluation about the comparative value of the sexes. Neither fiction can be put value to it. She finds trying to measure fiction a futile and quite impossible pursuit. Woolf is ready to answer the second criticism about her materialistic money based view of the topic of women. It is obvious that majority of the great writers have been wealthy men. Poor men have uh, rarely has made a name in literary history. Therefore, it is required for both the sexes to have a financial freedom if they want to become writer. The narrator wants to come to a conclusion, a justified conclusion, a balanced conclusion. She does so firstly by saying that creation of fiction is both selfish and for the common good. Secondly, she argues that to create a legacy for women, they should always focus on the work itself. The narrator has shown her audience how far women have come from Judith Shakespeare to Mary Carmichael. The narrator in the end talks about Judith Shakespeare, that she could not write a drama or play, could not open her wings. Like Judith Shakespeare, there may be many women writers whom we have forgotten in the present time. They may live again. She appealed to these women, these students, scholars of Newham and Girton College, to take care of that no woman become a Judith Shakespeare again. Okay, it was really great work by Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own. You will enjoy reading the text. I have just summarized the whole text. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me. We will again see you with a new chapter on Virginia Woolf. Thank you very much.